Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of House Bill 347.
Without objection, the lady is recognized to begin the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of House Bill 347 is to protect voters from aggressive taxing districts that can and do continually run bonds over and over again when they fail at the ballot boxes. It's a simple bill that recognizes the wishes and will of the voters for at least 11 months. And you may say, why 11 months and not a year? But what we found is if an aggressive taxing district runs a bill in May, and it's a May 9th election 1 year, and the next year it would be May 6th, we want them to be able to do a May 6th, and obviously that wouldn't be a full year. So that's why it's 11 months. I'd like to go straight to the language, and if you look at the language, the meat of the bill is on page 2. And I will just read you what the bill does. It says that in an event that a bond election fails to be approved by electors of a taxing district, no subsequent bond question of the same type or subject shall be submitted to the elections of the same taxing district for a period of 11 months from the date of the election that failed to approve the issuance of bonds. So what this bill does is protecting the voters when they go to the ballot box and they say, no, we don't approve this bond, that vote is actually respected for at least a year. And this bill does not target any specific taxing district. There's all kinds of taxing districts. It only refers to districts that run a bond and the bond fails. That's kind of who we're focusing on. Excuse me, guys. I wanted to, let's see. You may ask if this bill is really needed, and I want to go over a couple examples of what's happening across our state with aggressive taxing districts. In Minnetonka District presented a $21 million bond in March of last year, and when it was rejected, they came back in May, just 2 months later, with another bond for the ballot box. There was an aggressive taxing district up in Filer that ran an $8 million bond in March of 2019 and then just waited until August to rerun another one. Both of these bonds failed. And then in Kellogg, there was an $8 million bond that was run in 2019 of May, and then just again in August, they reran the bond again. And every time on these examples, the voters have said, no, we don't want to approve this, and they keep coming back again and again. I have some other examples from earlier, 2017 in Shoshone, a $6 million bond failed in August, and they reran it again in September. Bancroft, 2018, the quote in the paper was, after 3 tries, we're going to try again. They just keep running these bonds over and over, even after the people say no. There was a Chubbuck district in 2019, and after their defeat, they said, we will push for the bond again. And then one last example, in 2020, Idaho Falls, a $46 million expansion was run in January, and then again they rerun it in May, just a few months later. Mr. Speaker, if I may read just a quick quote from an email I received on this issue from a citizen.
Without objection, the lady may read a quick quote from an email she received on this subject.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and body. It just says, in March of 2015, a bond was put on the ballot for approximately $63 million. One day after the bond failed, we held a board meeting and put the exact same question on the ballot 2 months later in May. When the election took place, the bond failed the second time. The community was being torn apart by the fighting that was going on. Everyone who opposed the bond was being verbally attacked and slandered online as people who hated this issue. Many people had no idea what to do, but the district refused to give up and again ran the bond a third time, but this time for $1 million less. And so this is a problem because a lot of these aggressive taxing districts will run a bond for $40 million, and when it fails, they'll wait 2 or 3 months and rerun it, and they'll drop it down to maybe $35 million, and then they'll wait a couple more months and maybe drop it to $30 million, time and time again, until they get that right number. I don't think this is a good use of taxpayers' money to test the mood of the voters and to use that election cycle to actually get information on what your bond's actually on. I think a lot of these districts would do a lot better to educate citizens on the amount, what they need it for, and come up with a real number instead of testing the mood of the citizens. Some have asked, can an election cycle be limited? But we limit election cycles all the time. State legislators, we run and have a 2-year cycle. The governors every 4 years. What if your political opponent could challenge you after the May primary if you win? What if they could challenge you 3 months later? Even though you won, they could come challenge you again. And then when they lose the second time, they challenge you in a couple more months. And if they beat you after the 4th try, it's permanent. They're in your position. So it's just kind of an example. We do limit this elections across our state. I'm going to give you a couple examples since we're not unique in going after aggressive taxing districts. The state of Florida has a 6-month cool-off period for when a bond fails, that they have to wait 6 months. Indiana waits a full year. Kansas waits a full year. Oklahoma, 4 months. Virginia, 4 years if a bond fails. I'm not pushing that to this limit, but I do think that citizens, after their vote, they take their time to make a decision if they can afford the levy. They look at all their circumstances, they look at how it's going to affect them financially, and they make that decision. And I do think that needs to be honored, at least for a year. When I say this will save the taxpayers money, most elections, and it's hard to get a real firm number for this because anytime you put something on the ballot and nothing else is on the ballot, it could range from $10,000 to $80,000 to hold that special election. So that's a way it would help citizens. And the one thing that this bill doesn't do is it doesn't tell you when you can't run a levy. Some of these taxing districts have 4 opportunities to run a levy. They can pick if it's May or March, April, whenever they're allowed to do their elections. This only says if a bond fails, they're going to wait a year. And I truly think that we'll get better ballot questions. They'll do their homework, and they'll get taxpayers on the table to share their information. So some have asked about, well, what happens if there's an emergency? If you look at the language of this bill, there is a cause for emergency, and that code is 63-1309 at the bottom of the bill. And it talks about floods and fires and ways that if there's an emergency, that would trump something like this. So in summary, this bill just addresses aggressive taxing districts that keep rerunning a bond over and over until they get the answer they want. The government, this is government asking the people for money, and they ask the people, what can you afford for the services we're going to provide for you? Here's what we're going to provide, here's what it's going to cost. The citizens evaluate that and make that decision. It doesn't mean what they're asking for isn't important. It might be a very important building that government needs, but that decision If we're allowing the citizens to make that decision, we as society need to honor that decision at least for a year. And this bill passed through committee on a party lines vote. I'm just asking for your support on this bill. Thank you.